Welcome back to Wafer Designs for Cakes. I'm Kara Andretta, and we are going to be doing our flowers in this lesson. We're going to be using a lot of new tools and materials, so I want to go over that really briefly with you. My favorite material are these buttons that I got from the craft store. These are actual buttons. These are not gems or jewels. You do specifically need buttons because of their backs. We're going to be using these for some of our centers, like with our peony. We're also going to use these for our bling cake flower. We're going to be using some Model Magic. This is also interchangeable with gum paste. I choose Model Magic because I can just keep it very easily, make centers as I need them. I don't have to produce the gum paste. Use lots of floral tape. You need your needle nose pliers and wire cutters. These are pliers and cutters. I need 2 pairs for this. You probably will too. We're going to use some sugar glue, gum glue made with Tylose or CMC and water. You need your floral wires. We're going to be using a 24 gauge white tape covered wire, an 18 gauge white tape covered wire, and we're going to be using a 22 gauge brown cloth covered wire. And there is a reason we're going to need that versus tape, and I'll explain that when we get to our baby eucalyptus that we're going to be doing in this lesson. Also, we have all of our petals. We have lots of stamens. They're meant for different flowers, different items, but a lot of what we're doing is stylized, so you can really kind of interchange them. It's really a matter of what you like. We're using some poppy seeds, some thread, a number of brushes, and a hot glue gun. We're going to start with our bling flower, the one that we're using our metallic edible silver leaf with. And for that, we're going to start with our 18 gauge white wire. Now, this is a really thick wire. You could go to a 20. The higher the gauge number, the thinner the wire. It seems to work kind of backwards compared to what we're typically used to thinking. We're going to measure this to half. This is a 14¼ inch piece. So measure it to just over 7. Give it a snip. Reserve the other half. Now for our fantasy center, we're going to use one of these buttons. I'm rather partial to this button. It's nice and sparkly. These you can kind of just pull right off their base. Now the back of this has a little loop, and it's actually kind of a big loop. It's not exactly so little. Each one of these is going to be a bit different. So to accommodate that and so that it doesn't flop around on our wire, we're going to need to double up our wire. So to do that, we're going to take our needle nose pliers, come down about a ½ inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, bend it over like a shepherd's hook. Now I use my needle nose to get a really small hook up there, but I'm going to go in with my wire cutters, which have a ridged grip to them, and I'm going to pinch this shut. This is kind of a you got to get it on the first shot type thing, because if you release or if you slip at all, they don't really want to grab back in there. So you want to kind of pinch that the first time. You're going to grab it again and make another mild hook, not as tight as your shepherd's hook, because we're going to take the center and we're going to loop it on here. Now that has a pretty good grip. It has a good base with the wire. Turn it upside down. Get our wire cutters with the grip and bring these together. You got to have a little hand strength for this, and this is where the 20 gauge wire might be a little bit better. I like the stronger wire. Someone in my life once said, anything worth doing is worth doing to excess, so I'm doing it to excess. So we have our center for the bling flower. The only thing I'm going to add to this, because this is pretty bare, and if you've ever made gum paste flowers, you know there's really not much here and much meat for it to get stuck to. So I'm going to take a little bit of my black Model Magic. You can use white. I have black here, and we're really not going to see it, so it doesn't bother me so much. I'm just going to take a tiny, tiny little piece, probably no bigger than a pea. Now I'm going to take my wire, just pop it in the bottom, and thread it up the stem. Now this center, it has a button on it, it has a wire on it, and now it has Model Magic. This is a non-edible flower center. Many flower centers aren't anyways, but of course if you're making this for someone other than yourself or a party that you specifically may be attending, let people know, don't eat this stuff. This is not edible. You would be surprised who might try to pop this in their mouths, and it's not always the 2-year-olds. So we're going to set this aside, and we are going to move to the peony center, which also has the fun blingy buttons in the middle. There are lots of different options for these at the craft store. It's really kind of, it's button and bling paradise in that aisle. These are attached to their papers with just a tiny, tiny thin wire that you do have to pull out. Now this one is a little different. This does not have the loop on the back. This has 2 holes going through it so that you meant to put a piece of thread up and down. You can still use this as your center. I'll show you how to hide that. We're going to take our thicker pliers, so we want a little bit bigger of a hoop, shepherd's hook. Made that a little bit too narrow. You're going to thread it through one side, then you're going to bring the other side of it back up into that wire. And if this starts to catch like it is right here, just grab your grippy pliers, give it a little pinch until it slides right up like that. You want this to be as flush to the top as you can get it, and we are going to hide this wire with a little bit of Model Magic. You can use gum paste. You can even use edible sequins to cover this. We're going to come to the back. We're going to push these over so that they're kind of crossing like a pair of legs. We're going to give them a little bit of a turn. Because this is such a heavy gauge wire, you're not going to be able to get that really, really fine twist. You're really just looking to secure it at this point. This is really on there very tight. So it's in good shape. I'm going to take that little piece of black Model Magic that I had used on our bling center. I'm going to use that to mask. Use that to mask this wire. Just a little bit of sugar glue. Place that on top. Now you've got a little center. Kind of lightly tap around, don't press in too much, you're going to get a little fingerprint in there. But now that'll hold. And we're going to use the stamens now to fill that out. Now I have a lot of different stamens, and I think I'm going to use my really, really blingy ones. These ones have a lot of sparkles on them. Yes, they're very fantasy-ish, but again, these are stylized and antique peonies. Antique peonies do not grow in nature, so have fun designing. We're going to open these up. Now these come in pre-sized packages, more or less. And sometimes you're going to want to use all your stamens for a flower center. Sometimes you're just going to want to use a few. I like these when they're a little bit fuller, if it's a smaller stamen, and a little less full if it's a bigger stamen. So for this, I'm actually going to use all of these because we're only going to end up using one end. So I'm going to cut off all the rest of these. First, I'm going to try to make these as level across the top as possible. Now, before we go into securing these together, we're going to take a fine and sharp pair of scissors, and we're going to snip off the other sides of these buds. They're going to fly everywhere. Beware. They're like dragées. They're just going to go. Now, these are really sharp scissors, but if you grab too many, you might actually do damage to them. Now, I'm still holding these to try and keep them all flush. I'm going to grab my white florist's tape. This tape you can get at sugar suppliers online. This is what we typically use for our gum paste flowers, but you can also get it at your local craft stores in their flower section. It's really the same product. The way floral tape works, if you've never used it before, you have to stretch it to activate the stickiness. So you give it just a little bit of a pull. We're going to take this and we're going to wrap it around the bottom. And we're going to secure it to itself. Then we're going to give it a roll. What we're looking to do is get these all to stick firmly together. Ideally, you don't actually want to pull this too totally tight. Reason being, we're going to be inserting the rest of our bling center into this, so we need a little bit of wiggle room. And if there isn't enough wiggle room, we can always pull one or two out to make that wiggle room. We're going to take our center, figure out about where the middle is. We're going to give it a little push and see if there's some give. I feel like there's some give. Yep, there it is. Okay, so we're pushing it in. Once you get to about here, you can figure out where your stamens are sitting. Pull them apart just so this doesn't come down and kind of crimp them. And pull them over. And then gently work your center down into it. You may get a little bit of resistance at this point because this is where our center doubled over and we have some extra wire going in. Be patient, be gentle, don't ruin all your hard work. And if you feel like you do need some extra room, just pull one of your stamens gently out. Oh, that one even had a little bud left on it. Stinker. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to want to space these out a little bit more so that they sit evenly around there. Again, a little irregularity is good. Now this isn't terribly secure. We have to secure the stamens onto the wire. So we're just going to go in with this last little bit of tape. Go back around the stamens one more time and slowly spin it and turn it downwards so that you're then securing it to your wire. You don't have to go terribly far. Just make sure you keep twisting it so that you don't have any straggly tape right there. So this will be ready for our peony. The next one we're going to move on to are our poppy and anemone. These are both very similar in technique. So I'm going to show you how to make the two centers. I'm going to show you how to make one with the thread, and then I'll show you how to coat our anemone. And it's a little kind of ironic how I do the anemone. You'll see. There's my wire. We're going to start with our thick wire again. And we're going to cut these to be ready. These, because they're smaller flowers, I use these mostly in thirds. I don't use these in half. And again, I kind of eyeball this one. It's really not a big deal. Have those ready to go. Let's get out our model magic. That's the next part of what we're going to do. Ideally, you would do this ahead of time and have these kind of waiting and resting for you, like I have these ones down here. For your anemone, we're going to use about half a walnut size piece of black model magic or gum paste to make, oh, I got a little sparklies on there. And roll it in our hand to make a ball. Then you're going to want to have a styrofoam like this ready to go with a very, very, very high gauge wire, something really, really small. Then you're just going to rest this on here, hopefully overnight so that it has time to dry. Now you're going to use about half that much for your poppy, but what we are going to do with this is we're going to give it a little star pattern in the center. And then again, it'll sit in our foam overnight. To get that star pattern, we're going to use the same tweezers that we used when we were doing our vertical ruffle cake. We're going to very, very gently go in, give it a little squeeze, turn, squeeze. This is very soft at this point. For this one, gum paste really is probably more friendly for this technique. It doesn't have as much give. It wants a little bit more pressure to do what you want it to do, which is actually beneficial here. But we've got our star. We're going to move this over to our styrofoam and let this dry, hopefully overnight. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you wait overnight. I have some ready for you. I have some that I did dry, a poppy center and an anemone center. So we're going to go ahead and secure these onto our wire. We're going to do our thread, which actually makes me really happy to do. That sounds really strange, but I really love working with the thread with these. We're going to take our wires to start. We're going to do that same shepherd's hook that we did when we were making the loop for the button on the bling center. We're going to pinch the top, but just the top. You don't need to worry about pinching all the way down. You just want that top really closed. It's actually okay right now while you're holding it tight to just pull that bottom out just a little bit. So it looks almost like a number 1. Do that for both of them that we're making. Now what this is going to do, this right here is going to allow for us to insert our thread, but this is going to sit up here above where our thread is to allow us to take our center and secure it down on top without crushing our thread or getting in the way of our thread at all. So let's grab our thread. Oh, I already took it out. Now you're going to want to wrap this around your fingers, 2 fingers typically, about 100 times. I've done this enough that I now know that about 7 full pulls of my arm's length equals 100, or somewhere in there. So I can do other things like talk or scold the kids, scold the husband. Shh, I didn't say that. But sometimes I do more with this than 100. It really depends on what flower I'm doing and the fullness that I'm looking to gain from it. I really do like when there's extra there. It just looks so lush and so thick. You can, for these, also use stamens like we used for the others. But I really like the thin black thread for these stylized flowers. It's thin, it moves, it's delicate. It has a lot of lifelike quality to it. Now don't do this too tight. As you're working, make a conscious effort to not be reining in on your fingers or you're not going to get them out at the end. I actually did that once. I had to just cut it off my fingers. I made it too tight. How did I not notice I was doing that? We're going to slide it off our fingers. Snip our thread. We're going to hold the loop, take our hook, and loop it up and in. Again, it's not going to go down into this very tip that we pinched. I'm going to hold it there with our fingers. I'm going to grab the pliers that have the grip on them, give it a little bit of a twist. It's hard to do this by hand at this point with such a heavy gauge wire. Now we're going to use our brown floral tape for this one. Why? It's just what I like. And we're going to wrap this very much the same we did the peony. We're going to go a little bit above where the thread and the wire come together. We want to sandwich some of the thread and the wire at the same point, but not all the way to the top. You want that little knob to keep sticking up over the top. We need that accessible to put our Model Magic center on. And again, we're just going to do that twisting thing. Make sure you pull this to activate your stickiness. Then you're going to twist. You want to cover the entire overlap of the wires. You don't want any of that wire hanging out. This just secures it much nicer, and it'll keep that little extra wire from poking into you or hurting you while you're handling it. You'd be surprised what they do. Okay, so now we have a loop, but we need nice billowing frills. So we're going to try to find where they kind of looped together, thread through with the end of our scissors. Very sharp scissors are really, really important at this point. If you have dull scissors, you're going to hack at them and you're not going to get beautiful ends. I mean, these are almost hair cutter type scissors. And we have a straggler there. I'm going to cut that off. Turn this upside down. We found our center. We're going to kind of move these just so that they feel full and all around. But now we're going to take our hand and push it through so that we're holding all the threads back. Now you got to be really good at multitasking at this point. Hold your Model Magic ball in your hand. Grab your glue gun. This is a high temp glue gun. Please be careful. Burns from this are very serious things. Turn your glued bit upside down onto your thread and onto your wire. And while it's still warm, you have a narrow window of opportunity to pull these over and around and shape them and make sure that they fill in exactly where you want them. So now we do have some looped areas still. I want to go in and pull those out if I can before, in case they're caught on glue. I want to pull them out. That glue is pretty much set now. I did see a little loop, there it is. I saw a little loop still in here that didn't get cut. So I'm going to snip it there. Now these, compared to this one, are very long, and I don't want them to be that long because they're really going to obstruct the petal and the design that we had on that. So we're going to play hairdresser for a minute, and we're going to go in and just kind of keep spinning at the same exact point and trim these down. Oh, I got two long ones down there. Look at it from over top, straight on, so that you can see if you have any that look a little wild or out of place that you want to trim. And we're good. There's one more finishing item to this that we're going to do right now. Now, you know how I said that we're going to be using poppy seeds in a way that might surprise you a little bit or finish the anemone in a way? Oh, I just gave it away, didn't I? We're using poppy seeds on our anemone. Why aren't we using it on the poppy center? Because you really don't see them on poppies in real life. And not that we're looking for complete realism, but really the poppy center very much has this star shape, and it really has more of a shape to it, an identifiable shape, than it has a texture. The anemone has more of a texture. So I'm going to use the poppy seeds on the top of the anemone. We're going to be using a paintbrush, our poppy seeds, and our sugar glue for this. Open up your poppy seeds, but leave them in here. You don't need to take them out. Little less cleanup for you at the end of this one. Now, just like when we were prepping the thread to accept the center on top of it, we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to pull the thread back and away. Sometimes you have to kind of pet it a couple times before you really feel like you've got a good grip on it. You want to try and pull those all as far away from the base as possible, because we're going to go in with our sugar glue and we're going to coat this. Try not to get any sugar glue on your threads. Anywhere there is sugar glue at this point, there is going to be poppy seeds. And we want those threads to really be freestanding. We want them to be independent and just kind of free-flowing. And if they get any of this sugar glue on them, they're just going to all clump up. It's going to ruin the whole point of us using those beautiful fine threads. But you do want to make sure you get a good amount of sugar glue on here. Any bare spot or any very lightly touched spot, you're not going to get even poppy coverage, poppy seed coverage on there. So now we're going to take our poppies. I'm going to take this and just invert it straight into there, very gently, and move it around just a little bit so that it's not compressing the poppies, it's kind of moving them around. If you do just push it straight down and compress it, you're actually going to force the poppies up and away from where they originally sat. Now, So long as you didn't get any glue on your threads, you can get this right down into those poppy seeds. You're gonna give this just a little tap once you take this out. Again, these are like dragees. They're gonna get everywhere, and that's just life. Now this is coated. You can see right up in here, I had some really, really bare spots. I didn't get much glue in there. You can, I don't like doing this. I will sacrifice this one for you to show you. You can go back in with a little bit of glue to try and touch that up, but as soon as I put it on, I've got poppy seeds on my paintbrush. It's still manageable. You'll have to clean your paintbrush afterwards. Don't stick it back into your gum glue at this point. Be aware that you have to clean it before you stick it back in there. Just very gently tap it in this time. There we go. Now we've got a fully covered anemone center with poppy seeds. So this one's ready to go. We're going to set this aside to await its petals. Now our poppy center is very much the same as your anemone center. We're going to assemble them exactly the same, making your hook, your thread base. The only difference in its actual finishing is the color of your tape. And the reason I'm using green tape for the poppies is for the final look of our cake. We're going to have green stems and green grass, so we want this to kind of match. So that'll be your only difference there. Put our poppy seeds away as soon as you're done. Put your lid back on. They're like the dragee's natural cousin. Next, we are going to move on to our cherry blossom centers. Move these a little bit out of my way. I have some pre-made so you can kind of see where we're going with this. It's very simple. There's only 4 little stamens, a very fine wire. This is the 24 gauge white tape and a little bit of tape. These are super quick and easy to make. This is an assembly line type item. I'm going to take these small yellow pearl tipped stamens. Now if I were doing a whole bunch of these at once, I would actually open these up and then lay them out in little groups of 2s or 3s, just so I could kind of work right down the line. I'm just gonna make one for you right now. Because as much fun as I have doing this, as meditative and kind of zen as it is for me, pretty certain you guys don't want to watch me do 50 of them. So we've got our 2. We'll grab our 24 gauge wire. This we're going to cut also into less than half. We're going to go down to quarters. These are going to be assembled onto a longer piece of wire, so they don't need to be terribly long. There's no sense wasting all that wire. So again, we're going to measure it. 14 inches, cut at 7. And cut at 3.5, approximately. For this, you're going to want to use your fine needle nose pliers. We're using such a small wire, need such a small hook. Really, your needle nose are what's going to come in most handy. We're going to fold this in half at about the 1/2 inch mark again, making your little shepherd's hook. Now we're going to take these. You can do this one of 2 ways. You can keep these completely even, and then when you bring them together, they're all pretty much going to sit at the same height, which is fine, but it's nice to have a little bit of variety. Just move one of them over slightly. Then you're going to have them sitting at slightly different heights. You can even do it a little bit more severe. That looks really nice. So now we've got this little loop that we've kind of created at the bottom. And take our hook, grab it, and kind of pinch it just a little bit to secure it. Use your pliers to bring it together. This you might want to give it a little bit more of a twist. If you really don't feel like you got that little loop closed, get your wire cutters that have the little grip on them. Now don't at this point grip too hard, and I can show you why. If you grip too hard and too high up, you'll actually sever your stamens. These are really very delicate, and even though this wire is small with the right amount of pressure, it's just going to cut straight through them. So you don't want to be, don't get all Hulk on it. So we'll make another one since, for the sake of education, I ruined that one for you. Happy to do it, don't worry. Again, bring them together, do a little cross, a little turn. A gentle squeeze, not a big squeeze, a gentle one. Now we're going to go in with our brown floral tape. You really only need a small piece for this. Do the same thing. Secure it by pinching it to itself right up here. You want it to cover half on the wire, half on your stamens, so it secures them and hides that little coming together area. And just give it a twist. Be gentle here, because if you're right-handed like me, it's going to make more sense to twist where your stamens are, and you don't want to damage those. You don't want to pinch them hard like we did just before and have them pop off. Go down a little bit below where that second wire ends. Give it a little bit more of a twist. And we have another one of our centers. Now I've shown you how to make the cherry blossom center, which is also going to double as a freesia center. I only made one for you. You see I have a fistful here. This is really how many you're going to need. No matter what project you're doing, you're going to need a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, depending on how many you're going to make. So at home and for a project, you'd be doing a whole ton of these. We've got all of our centers assembled, so we're going to move right into putting our flowers together, and we're going to start with our Fantasy Bling flower. We're going to take the petals and we're going to give them some shape. Actually, I'm going to leave this way. And yes, even though you have edible metallic leaf on here, you can still give it some shape. Don't be scared. I know I was a little nervous when I first did this, worrying that I was going to ruin all my metallic silver leaf or that it was just going to come flying off of there. It's going to get a little bit of a texture, but it's still going to be super shiny and it's really going to reflect. And yes, it's going to hold its shape. And just like I mentioned before, the smaller diameter of a rod you use, either a dowel or a bamboo skewer or half of a knitting needle like I do, you're going to get a tighter curl. This one I don't want too tight of a curl, because the more this is going to curl in, the less of the metallic is going to show. You want some movement to it so that it looks lively, but you don't want to hide that. And if you get really good at it, you can do 4 at a time. Just make sure you have them lined up well and that you're paying attention to what you're doing. But again, this is very much that assembly line type process. I don't recommend doing this right off the bat. Once you get comfortable with your medium, then it's a great thing to do. Learn your medium first. Learn how it's going to behave. Even every time I go to start one of these initially, I like to try just one, because sometimes the climate or the wafer paper that came in, or even the amount of oil that I put on my paper is going to kind of change how they behave from one session to the next. So you give them a little bit of a test first. Now sometimes I do these petals for this flower very sparingly. I'll only do maybe 6. This time I'm going to make it a little bit more full and fanciful. I'm going to do 2 layers. I'm going to do a front layer and then a second layer coming out from behind to make it feel a little fuller. Okay, so we've got all of our curled petals. Move our foam off to the side here. And now, since we have straight wafer paper at the bottom of the petal, we're going to just use water to adhere these to each other. And get a couple ready in my hand at a time. And just like before, just a light amount of water. It's right there on the center. As soon as you put these together, they're going to stick. Now I'm noticing with this that I had a little bit of extra wafer kind of overlapping onto my silver. That's just a little too much. So I'm going to go through the rest of them really quick and just see if I can snip back any of these little points. I want as much of this wafer to hide underneath the center as possible. I don't really want to see wafer. I want to see that beautiful, shiny, metallic silver leaf. The ones that are going to be behind, it's not as much of an issue, but I don't really plan which ones are going to go in front and which are going to go in back. It's one of those spur of the moment decisions, how they're kind of coming together, how they look. Okay, now we'll go ahead and assemble the rest of them. I'm going to do my first layer going around here. I'm going to add, we'll say 4 more petals. We'll do 6 layers on the front tier of our flower. I guess we could think of this kind of like a cake. A little bit of a push, just kind of trying to keep these even, equally spaced, equally angled, opposites facing each other. I like that one, it's too tiny. Use a slightly bigger one. Now we've got our center pretty much started. I'm going to switch over at this point to a little bit of piping gel. A little bit of piping gel, not a ton. Try not to get it on your silver leaf. These kinds of things can actually tarnish your edible silver leaf. So we want to keep water moisture away from it. And we're going to take our center very much the way we slid it through our stamens for our peony. We're going to slide it right through the center of this as well. This isn't something you want to do too far ahead, because if you do, and then you let this sit and wait for you to put the center in there, that wafer where it all comes together is going to get really crisp and really hard, and you're really going to have to push this through, and you might damage some of your petals. You can start to see it come together. This is the really exciting part. We've finally gotten past what some of my friends refer to as the ugly stage, where you can't really totally see it and they all look kind of disembodied in different parts, but now it's starting to come together. Now to add the rest of these, I'm going to hold this in my hand. I'm going to hold the other one in my hand. I'm going to add these one by one to the back. I'm really going to watch it from the top now. Just a little bit of water, because now I really kind of want to see how this is going to fill out. And because the water likes to stick and help wafer paper just kind of grab onto each other, I really only need to place it and give it a very gentle nudge to sit. Don't feel like there is a very particular method or way that this absolutely has to be done. If you feel like you don't need one in the back in a certain spot, don't put it there. Make it look natural. Don't make it look forced. Yes, it's a bling flower. No, flowers don't grow with beautiful crystals, but you can still make it look like it was meant to be, and like it flows and like it makes sense. You know how sometimes you go just a little too far, you add a little too much of something to a project, and then it's like you do a little bit more to overcompensate and to try and correct it, and then it's worse, and then you keep doing more. Don't do that. And if you have any pieces, this last one that I put on here, if you have any pieces that have little bits of the edible metallic leaf missing, use those in the back. They're not a loss. Keep them on the back side. Save your prettiest ones for the front that have maintained all their silver and don't have any signs of damage. Got our last petal that I'm going to slip in here, and then you'll get to see probably our fanciest flower completed. This one makes me really happy. If you've been around me very long, you know that things that shine and sparkle really, really get my blood going. I really, really love this. Now you may have a little bit of a weakness back here. You want to come back here with just a tiny little bit of water and tack down any parts that might be sticking up. Not with very much water at all, but just to secure it. A few last dabs of water and a few gentle little nudges with my finger, and we are all set. It's finished, and we're going to move on to our peony next. You're going to let this sit in a foam overnight. If you feel like your petals are falling over a little bit, or might just need a little bit more time in their current state upside down, you can dry your flower like this. And that'll help it from opening up too much or falling apart. Next, we're going to move on to our peony. We're going to begin by taking our pre-colored petals, and at the very bottom, we're going to snip them just a little, only about a ½ inch in. We're going to do that with each one. The reason we're doing that is we want to be able to bring them in and together so that they form a little cup on the bottom. And we're going to start with our smallest of the petals as our centers. So we have 5 of them here, 5 of the small, 5 of the large. Let's start by using our piping gel for this. Since we already have an oil coat on here, the water is going to want to resist a little bit, and we're going to have to put on kind of an excessive amount of water to get it to do anything, and water's our enemy sometimes. So I just put a little bit of piping gel just to one side of my cut. I'm going to take them, cross them over each other like a pair of legs, give them a pinch, and now they're sitting like a cup. I'm going to do that only with the first 3. We're going to start with 3 going around the center, and then we're going to we're going to step back for a second. We're going to look at it and see how it's coming together, and then we'll start placing the other petals around it. But we're not doing this right on the center just yet. We're actually making a little petal cup that the center is going to get threaded through. So don't be confused when I don't grab the center. I haven't lost my marbles, I promise you. Okay, so we've got our 3. A tiny, tiny bit more piping gel down on the bottom of one of the cups. Add your next one in there, just like we did when we crossed the sides over, pinch it. Make sure they're nice and secured together. And do that again with your last of the center small ones. Here you're probably going to have to use the butt end of your paintbrush to get in there. But now we have a little center that will stand. This is a really great start. So because we have such an open side, see how delicate it is? I breathe on it and it runs away. Air conditioning, open windows, don't do it. You make yourself nuts. So we have a couple more open spots right here, and this is where we're going to kind of just get a feel for things, and we're going to insert these around there. I am going to cup these ones. I feel like they need more shape. There's not enough stability on there yet for me to just kind of place some around there. So I'm going to create a more gentle cup. This isn't going to be as much at a 90-degree, as much of a 90-degree angle as the other cups were. And to do that, you simply don't cross them as far over. The farther you cross them, the more significant of a cupping you're going to get. So you can control the degree not only of the bottom cup, but of the actual curl of the petal. If I were to cut far up and really kind of cross it over way up to here, I would get a really nice kind of, it almost look like a luge. Same thing, just a gentle cupping with that one. And now when you go to place these on, you're going to utilize your table. Stick your finger inside of your cup gently, because these are still very much at a delicate stage. Turn it to where you want to apply this. Put it where you like it. Push your finger down and just hold for a second. And that's where we're going to ask it to stay. Now it's going to be a little heavy on that side, so it's going to want to fall over. That's fine. It's wafer. Remember, I can drop it and nothing happens. It's magical stuff. Now with this part, because we're going to be layering so much piping gel into there, you really want to get lighter and lighter and use the least amount possible for the rest of this. The least you use, the faster it'll dry and the stronger it will be. You'll actually create quite a bit of weakness in the wafer itself if you have too much there, and not only would it melt, even if it did stay together, you're going to have little areas that may have disintegrated fully, so that's just naturally going to cause a secondary weakness once it dries, even though these do dry nice and firm. So now we've got the start of our cup. This is a really great center, but this still isn't stable enough, strong enough, and there's not enough bulk there to take our center and insert it. So we're going to go ahead and maybe cup a couple of the other ones, but we're going to start applying them to the outside. I'm going to save my two bigger ones, definitely, for the very outside petals. Two of the more narrow ones for the inside. Let's cup these two gently, probably even more gently than what we did with the last. So you don't want them all to create this kind of tunnel thing. You don't want them to just kind of shuffle around each other. You want them to start falling open. And if they all have the same angle, they're just going to want to kind of file against each other, almost like spoons in a drawer. Okay, same thing. Just a little tiny bit. Whoop. Let's see, I said I wanted one over here. Now I'm also not taking that cup and putting it directly underneath the center because that may not give me the shape that I want. Only push it in as much as you want it to nestle against the last petal. If you want it to open more, if you want more depth, like we have here between these two petals, don't put your center of your cup directly under the existing center of the grouped petals. So this will be our last cupped piece, and then we'll put in the flat ones, unshaped. And don't stick your fingernail straight into the damp wafer. You will get stuck like a tar pit. Okay, and this is getting, you can see this is a little soft. This is a little loose. It kind of wants to move. At this point, just take it and rest it up against your dish, just so it doesn't fall and so that it doesn't tear and want to break. It just needs a little time for that piping gel to kind of dry up a bit. Now I'm going to put this piping gel on both sides of that cut. I cut all of them just in case. That way I don't have to go back and say, oh, well, I want more cut pieces because I want more cupped pieces. You just cut them all right away, and it's actually good to be able to have that little bit of play in the center of them so that you can move them around a little bit better once you're placing them. So now you're going to hold this gently in your hand. You're going to cup your hand to support this. These will also act to support some of these more outer petals that are starting to fall open. And I'm okay with these sitting more flat than what may look normal and natural while it's standing solo by itself, because we're taking these and inserting them in a floral separator, so they're naturally going to kind of close on themselves. So if you leave them open, they're actually going to fill up more space once they're inserted in that final setting. But again, using your finger inside after placing these. Now again, the template that I gave you in your downloadable course materials has 10 petals on it for you to create this 5 small, 5 large. It's only a template and it's only a suggestion. If you feel like adding an extra petal would help your design and help the flower feel more full, great. You want to add 10 more petals, more power to you, just print out extra sheets. I always like to have an extra sheet or two printed out so that if I make that last minute judgment call, I can say, you know what, I have one ready to go. Extras is always good. Now I'm actually going to utilize the side of some of these other centers to prop up a couple of these petals, since I'm not going to be utilizing them right away. Oftentimes when we're caking, we're working in really, really small spaces, so we don't have the opportunity as much to spread out as much as we like. So now I want to show you a little bit about this center versus one of the other ones I made. Both of them are great. This one has a little bit of a ledge to the bottom. This one is a little bit more perfectly tapered. This will provide you with a few benefits when putting it in there. It will sit higher. You're not going to want to pull this down as much, and that's fine. But if you don't like this to sit as high, you want to have more of an intentional taper, because when we thread that into our peony, it's going to sit higher up around all the stamens. So I'm going to use this one to finish off our peony. Again, we're just going to use a tiny bit of piping gel in the very center. We want the piping gel and the wafer to kind of grab on to the tape that's around the bottom of that stamen center. Very gently, because your petals are still very kind of precariously perched together until they dry more. Very gently thread this directly through the center. Grab it with your 2 fingers behind so that you can guide it and so that it's not just going to fall or move off to the side. You should be able to let go of it like I am and have it sit stably. You really need to support your flower. Gently pull it in. These little clusters like to grab onto absolutely everything, but these are honestly my favorite stamen centers. I think they're actually called cluster centers. And since we're doing, I know these aren't botanically correct, but since these are antiqued, stylized peonies, I picked out the ones I wanted. Gently pull it in, don't go too fast, don't be too forceful. Once you feel like you have it as far down as you want it, now you want to turn it over. And if you have any petals that are loose and popping up from the last little manipulation, that's when you're going to want to tack them down. Or they're just going to jump right off, just to test your patience. Sometimes they're like children. I'm going to put that one back. We know where it was. We'd already placed it visually. So we're going to gently press it back on there. I don't like how that's popping up right there. And also, if your fingers are starting to get sticky at this point, this is where a plastic or acrylic handled brush comes in handy, especially one that has this tapered end. Whenever I do sugar flowers or any other really kind of fine work, I like to have this tapered end paintbrush in my hand. You'll see pretty much everything I do on film or on camera, you'll see this paintbrush. It's kind of like my buddy in the kitchen and in sugar work. Little more here, and just like we did with our bling flower, because these bottom petals are being a little fussy, it's a little bit humid today, which is helpful in that this isn't going to become too brittle. I'm going to have a little bit more playtime with all of my petals, but because it's humid, that piping gel, or if you decide to use water for whatever design you're doing, isn't going to want to dry as immediately. So drying it in kind of an upside down fashion just by bending your wire helps. So for our project, we're going to finish off the rest of these centers with the final petals that we cut out for the peonies. But for now, we're going to move on to our stylized anemone. We're going to start the same way we did with the peonies, where we're going to make a simple, small incision, about a 1/2 inch. A 1/2 inch is kind of like the general rule I like to work with these, but we're only going to do 3. Anemones tend to be a little bit flatter. I do want them to be slightly cupped around our center. I don't want them to look like a flower pattern on wallpaper. So I want them to have a little bit of life, but I don't want them to have too much movement. Bring these over. This is actually a really quick flower to assemble. This is going to be very much the same process that we use for our poppy, but our poppy, you'll see, will have a little bit more cupping and a little bit more shape. But they're going to be relatively similar. Again, piping gel just on one side, lightly. If you get too much, pull it off. It's just going to cause a problem for you. And curl them. We're going to do that kind of gentle cupping. We're not going to do such a severe cupping like we did with the center for the peony. Do that with your first 3. Now, just as we did with the peony again, we're going to create that layered cup. And because these are more of a regular shape, they're almost geometric with their triangular drop shape, you're going to want to more evenly space these. Your peony was it was very rustic, honestly, and very natural. But for this anemone, it's going to be more of a crisp looking design. Not geometric, but it's going to be a little bit more regular looking. So we have our opening cup. That's a really beautiful cup. That makes me happy. We're going to do the same thing as we did with the peony by adding some of these to the bottom. Actually, you know what? I'm feeling like there are no rules to this. Remember that I said that, but I'm feeling like this needs its center right away. So if you look at this center, it's a little flatter underneath. It doesn't have that big bulkiness to it. It's not tapered. It really is just your straight wire up until the pretty much flat bottom of your center. So that'll lend really well to just sitting in this cup right now. And since we don't have so many layers of piping gel, we might as well just put it in and make it easier to handle this cup of wafer right now. So just like the peony, just some piping gel. This one, with that thread there and with the Model Magic center, it's actually much happier to nestle in there against that piping gel and wafer. Between 2 fingers again, you should be able to hold it up and it stays stable, but still very gently threading it in. If you feel like you're getting some resistance, give it a twist. Almost like you're inserting a screw into a piece of wood. A little twist will help it lead in better. And then gently on the bottom, pinch. Very gently though. You don't want too much, because if you pinch too much, just like when we made our stamen centers for the cherry blossom, you might just pinch this right away from there. And this one I'm just going to put these at very regular intervals, right where the 2 petals come together, so that it fills it in nicely. Again, for most people, this seems like a little bit more of an intentional regular flower, but it really kind of works for the anemone. We have some kind of loose rebel wild child going on in our peony, so we can have the more straight-laced anemone. Our last one going on. Don't be too ready to let go of these. You do want to give them just a little firm push to make sure they're sticking there. Because if they fall off, you're going to create a weakness in both pieces of wafer paper. Turn it over. You have your anemone. Again, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a pinch beneath and behind. Now, if you feel like these are falling too far away from your flower, just like we did with the peony, you can go in and tack a little bit more. But since we're going to be inserting these into the side of a floral separator, that's okay. They're going to end up getting pushed forward for presentation anyways, and we don't want it too flat. So that's our anemone. Can move right on to our poppy. Oh, our anemone is misbehaving. It's the humidity here today. You really do have to be in tune with it. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the other 2. Just give our stem a little bend and let it hang out upside down for a while. That'll help it. Same process with the poppy. Difference is I am going to give this a more significant curl in the center, a significant cup, excuse me. I'm going to start with a 3. We're only using 5 petals here. Now when I assemble these together in a cup, I don't like it to be regular at all. It feels different to me than the peony. And I'm going to show you, because it can be kind of hard to explain. It's almost like the poppy tousled its petals, like someone might tussle their hair. A little devil-may-care kind of look to it. Now these, because they have the gel color on them as opposed to the wet oil dusting, these are going to stay sticky, especially if it's a humid day. Just be aware of that. Your fingers are going to pick up some of the color. Try not to touch the red since you're going to be working on your yellow parts. Yes, I know that's going to be hard, actually. Now this one, instead of kind of placing it right in the center, almost like a little pie chart, I'm going to overlap the center a little bit more. And I'm going to push, use my finger, push down a little extra. I really I want that to come in, and I want it to cup, pull in, and kind of misbehave a little bit. And if you're getting this is a little too regular for me, I'm going to take these and pinch these a little and try to get these to kind of pull in around each other. Be careful though, if you manipulate them too much. Almost like I am. You're going to get tears and irregularities. Now that doesn't look so regular, which is really nice. Now just like the anemone, I think I'm going to go right in with my center. And then we'll build those last 2 petals on the very outside, having a look at where they might look the nicest. And now I learned with that anemone that this humidity is kind of not playing nice with the piping gel, so I'm going to put a little bit of extra piping gel in there. It seems like, well, why are you going to put more wetness in there? It's because it's sticky, not because it's wet. The stickiness is what I'm looking for. Okay, so that's our start. Have a look at the flower. Sometimes, honest to goodness, sometimes you're going to look at this and you're going to say, you know what, that's gorgeous, that's all I need, that's where I want to stop. I'm going to add more. Remember what I said, whatever's worth doing is worth doing to excess. And because we're only adding 2, I'm not too worried about overhandling the bottom. So I'm going to do this straight up and down. I really want to see what it's looking like. And turn it just a little. I like that. I think I'm going to put our last petal right back here. Now we're using an odd amount of petals. Visually, and from my fine arts background, odds just tend to feel more natural. They tend to feel nicer. Oftentimes in flowers, even in nature, you see odd amounts of petals. You don't always see evens. And it just tends to be a little bit more visually pleasing. And so this one, not only the colors make me happy and the contrast with that black, the shape and the odd number of petals makes me happy as well. And you see how it's not as regular on the inside. It feels kind of tousled, like somebody threw their hair back with their fingers. It's kind of like what the poppy did with its petals. So I'm going to move ahead and do more yellow and some more red poppies for our project. But next, I'm going to show you how to do our cherry blossom / freesia. It's a versatile little flower. So right here you can see I have a whole bunch of pre-made cherry blossoms, which will actually double as a freesia as is, but let me show you how I made them. I do have a new tool that I haven't shown you yet. It's a little craft punch just from the craft store, and it has a little four blossom cutter at the bottom. This is actually called a hydrangea punch. You'll recognize the flower if you've made them in gum paste. We're going to take some wafer strips. Again, just like with the scissors, you only want to do 2. Sometimes this can handle 3, but you definitely don't want to put any pre-colored paper in unless it's been colored with your edible ink printer. Now to make a whole bunch of blossoms, you would just keep punching. We really only need 3 per blossom. We're going to start by giving it a little bit of shape. We need 2 petals for every single flower that are going to be curled. You can stack these up. They're only going to get a gentle curl, so you don't need to worry about them having too significant of a cupping. Turn it 90 degrees. Get your other 2 petals. Now you can see they have a slight cup to them. We're going to start with one of our flat pieces. Gentle bit of water. When you apply this on here, it's just going to be offset slightly. And then you're going to flip it over. Same thing again. Offset slightly. A little bit of a pinch. Now, before you set this down, you may be really fast at working with this, and you may be able to do a whole bunch of these at once. But you kind of want the center to stay a little wet, a little bit damp. It'll make it easier for you to insert your center straight down into it. Bring it up almost to the top of your stamens and give a little pinch underneath. If it's a little wet here, this is good, because when that gels and then solidifies, it's like your glue. So now if you have a little wire rack like this, you can prop it up here, or if you're more accustomed to styrofoam, just place them right there. So for our antique floral cake, we're going to be using them as freesia, but I'm also going to show you how to make a really stunning cherry blossom branch with just the same flowers. We'll start with our freesia because it's a much simpler technique. And it'll be our building blocks for our cherry blossom branch. I'm going to start at the very end of my cloth-covered brown floral wire. Give my brown floral tape that little tug that it needs. Bring it around, pinch it, and start spinning it just barely. Whoops. Move these in front of me. All that work, we don't want it to go to waste. You don't want to go too far here. We do want a blossom sitting towards the end of the branch. We're going to take one of our blossoms and give it just a little bit of a bend right where the tape kind of peters out on the wire. Line that up right with the tape, and now the tape is going to secure right around that point. These tapes match. They are the same tape. The one that was on the flower that I already made is a little bit darker, and that just comes with age and air. So this one will match it, given time. Now I've come down about an inch, and I'm going to add another one in at this point. You don't have to add them in all at the same height and at the same line. You can give them a little bit more character, a little bit more movement. They can be a little bit off to the side, that's fine. Cherry blossoms don't like to be told where to go, neither do freesia. Then you pull it apart just a little, and all of a sudden your branch is starting to take form. We're going to continue just like this all the way down. Once you get a little closer to the bottom, you're going to space them out a little bit more. You're not looking to have them so clustered. Again, it won't look regular, it won't look machine made. It'll look more like they actually grew on a tree. That's just kind of how they appear. Now, if you have a little bit of white that seemed to pop up, don't unwind your tape. That stickiness is going to get all over the place, and then your tape actually gets a little weaker. Just take this and push it down until it goes in. You really want to be in tune with what you're doing. That way you can catch it before you get all the way down here. Once you've taped that whole little bit of wire, it's not going to move anywhere. You're not going to be able to push it in to fix that little tiny, tiny mistake. Now, just as I said that this technique is also going to be used for our cherry blossom branch, this taping, this alternating our flowers going down, this is very much the same, but I'm going to be using a much bigger branch made of a different wire. So I'll move on to that real quick. You've kind of got the gist of this. For this, I am using a copper wire. I've used this for structure for other cakes. As you can see, they're a little bit kind of crooked, a little bit bent. That's okay. Don't throw this stuff away when you have this in your kitchen, because for something like our branch, this is going to come in really handy. These little kinks make it look like a really rugged branch. That's good and that's okay. So this copper wire, which is very, very sturdy, as you can see, it's taking a little bit of effort to bend. This is a 10 gauge copper wire. You can use 12 as well. You'll have a little bit more room to play. You can get this at your local hardware store. You can buy it by the foot, so you don't have to invest in a whole lot. It's copper. It is a little bit more expensive, but it's incredibly sturdy. You're not going to find anything like this in the cake world or in the craft world. This is one of those things where you kind of have to branch out and get into an area you're not totally familiar with. We're going to start wrapping these. We need a really good base around this. So we're going to start wrapping these completely in floral wire first, or floral tape, pardon me. And the reason we're doing that is it's going to give us a little bit of a sticky base to work against, at least with our cloth-covered floral wire for our freesia. That gives us a little bit of resistance, a little bit of traction to hold on to the wire from our blossoms. This, it's just going to slide against it. You're going to fumble a little. So it's good to just kind of build up the surface that you're going to be working on this way, similar to priming your cake with ganache to accept your fondant. You don't put it right against your actual baked cake. Again, ergonomics. Work with what helps you move most fluidly and quickly. Now, I like to tear my tape off the roll. Some people like to work straight off the roll. And I just happen to have the right amount. I'm magical. That was really just a guess. I just find it easier to not deal with my roll. Sometimes it'll run off the table, hit the floor, or it'll get all twisted. Just find it easier to grab little pieces and work that way. So as much as I really do love realistic looking gum paste flowers, Wafer just offers so much more customization. And so when I use Wafer, I don't think of real flowers. I think of what I would want my most fancy, fun flower to look like. I think of what I really, really love about a specific flower, like the poppy. I really love that really rich, bold color and the impossible kind of, who cares where my petals fall, look to it. And you can't get that with gum paste, which is why I use Wafer. So Wafer, I feel like Wafer is just very inspiring in that it will let me create movement and texture and feel and create kind of an atmosphere around it. So if I want to feel movement, Wafer allows me to give it movement. If I want it to feel very regular and very structured, Wafer can also let me do that. But when I'm thinking of a cake and I want Wafer flowers on it, I kind of design my cake first. The flowers may be the center part, but I look at my design, my texture, my colors, and then I think, well, what kind of artistic flowers? How could I make Wafer work this way for me? Craft punches, thinking about just how you can utilize things that are not your typical cake materials and tools. Stop thinking cake with Wafer. Don't think cake. When you don't think cake, then you start getting some really awesome ideas. You've got to think outside your box. So now we're going to apply our flowers. We're going to start again with a piece of tape. Before you do that, just look at your branches. We kind of have a bend. I bent this one so that it looks kind of like it's coming out of the ground. This is where I would insert it either into a drilled cake board, or you would have to use this in a styrofoam base cake. A lot of times we'll see dummies at the bottom of cake just to build up the number of tiers. It needs something like that. Copper is food safe, that's fine, but it's just too heavy and too strong. So this one has a nice arc, so that can be our base that we build on, and then we'll add this one over here. We're going to line this up where we think we might like it. I really like the way this looks. It almost looks kind of like a mini abstracted tree. I'm going to remember that right about here, at about maybe almost 4 inches up my bases. I'm not going to put any more flowers past that. We're going to assemble our flowers on here first, and then we'll bring them together down here. Now, if you want, you can actually make additional little tinier branches coming off of this using more of your floral wire that look a little bit more delicate. I'm going to go right onto the branches with these though. Same technique. You're going to be working down, starting with your tape at the top, adding your blossoms as you go. A little bit of our copper is showing at the top there, so I'm just going to cover that as I apply my first bit of tape. There we go, that's all set. Again, you're going to give it that tiny little bend right above where the tape meets the wire. And what's nice at this point, because the tape's already on here, the tape wants to stick to the tape. So even after that first little, about 1/8 of an inch, it's already stuck on there. That's really why I use this tape ahead of time. Now, as you move down your branch, you're going to collect more and more of these wires overlapping, so it's going to give it a little bit more shape, a little bit more character, and a little bit more thickness, which will work really well to your advantage with the freesia, but it'll also make this branch look a little bit gnarled and a little bit more realistic, which is really nice. When I made my first one of these, I got questions from all of my cake maker friends about how I created that branch and how it looked so real. Oh, we ripped our tape. No big deal. This tape is wonderfully sticky. Some people asked if I had actually covered it in modeling chocolate after I assembled everything. I said, no, actually, I just kind of used haphazard looking little wires underneath. You can make these as thick along the branch as you want, or as thin. Cherry blossoms tend to grow in clusters, so if you want to do a few double blossoms coming out, that's great. The freesia tend to be very linear. They grow in a row. They're like little flower soldiers. But cherry blossoms, they tend to grow in clusters at points. So we'll actually do a little cluster right now. Sometimes my husband says to me, you know, where do you get these ideas for cakes or for wafer or for flowers? And then I tell him, well, what do you think I'm doing at the craft store when I, when I walk through there for hours and don't come home with bags? There is so much inspiration all around you. I really love the button aisle, which I used with my peonies. The fancy bling on those really inspires me. The texture of even the fake floral department. You know, I really look at, those are synthetic, but how could I recreate that in food? How could I use wafer? And if I find a texture or something I like, I then wander over to another aisle and see what cutting instrument or what additional tool I could add to my arsenal that might create that. I think of things in very small terms. I don't think of them in broad terms. I think, well, I like that texture. How do I make that texture? Then I say, well, how do I take that texture and apply it to a cake? I don't always start at the very end design when I'm creating. Sometimes I think of just the components that I want to achieve. So for this branch, that's as far down as I'm going to go. I'm going to do the other one. I just don't want to bring them together and have the flowers kind of butting up against each other, fighting for space. Now the other branch is a little bit more gnarled. This one was more of a gentle curve. We've got this bump here. Use it to your advantage. It's really actually very cool. So I'm going to go ahead and cover this other one, and then I'm going to show you how to combine them. So now that I've made my two branches, I'm going to bring them together. We're using floral tape again, but you're going to use a little bit more floral tape. These branches are heavy and they are thick, and they kind of want to do their own thing. So we have to give them a little extra support and reinforcement. Again, start kind of up a little bit on your branch, wrapping around at that same twirling angle. You want to get a good anchor at this point, though. You don't want to start attaching them right away. I wrap it around maybe 6 or 7 times before I bring the other branch in, just to make sure that it's really secure. You can actually build this resting over top of your foam if you need to. Make sure you guys can see it. Just going to rest that very slightly in there until I get a few wraps around. Match that up with it. Maybe a little bit higher. There we go. And while they're supported, just so that I'm not banging them around and they're not falling out of my hand, because they are much more awkward and weighty than your regular floral wire, I'm just going to keep pulling and wrapping. Whoa, wild wrapping. Once you feel like these are really kind of secured and hanging out together, then you can pull them out and twirl them just like we did the rest of the branch. Now, if you want to have two freesia kind of come together, you're going to do this in very much the same way. These techniques are so similar. It's just that here we're using two branches. With the freesia, we only used one, but we're still doing that layering down technique and the wrapping with floral tape all the way down the stem. Incredibly similar. The difference I'm going to show you between these two is how I'm going to use them on the cake and how I'm going to color them or not. For my antique floral cake, I'm going to leave my freesias white, but in our next lesson, I'm going to show you how to color your cherry blossoms with a dry dusting technique. As you can see, I'm getting a little awkward because this is no longer just a round base. Now, even though this feels pretty stable to me, I could probably grab onto each of these and pull them apart. I'm going to turn these upside down now and actually work downwards until I can get around the base of one. You can support them in here. Oh, runaway center. If you need to, but again, it's wafer. You can just do that too. You don't want to be mean to it, but you have a lot more leeway and flexibility in handling these. I don't advocate throwing your flowers across the room unless you're really, really mad about something. Then by all means, express yourself. But I'm feeling, even going around just now, I'm feeling like this is pretty secure in here, so I'm just gonna finish up this one little piece of tape coming back up, and I think it'll be pretty good. But now you have your flowers down here, so you kind of have to fidget a little bit more with your tape so it's not catching on your flowers. Your flowers are gonna come around and catch your sleeves or your arms. Just be aware of where they are. Now I'm getting to the split. So I'm going to come up one branch just to finish it off so it doesn't look like it has leggings on. And tear it off. Secure it. If you have a little bit of this spot where it's coming together, you can either snip it with scissors or just kind of push it in a little bit with your angled paintbrush. If you do that, you get a little bit more of a natural split between the two. Doesn't look so forced. And there they are. Now you can rest these until you're ready to color them or until you're ready to actually use them. In a styrofoam, put it right in the center. Putting it on the edge, it might pull the rest of your styrofoam over. If you have a nice soft place to put it, like bumpy foam, you can also put it on the bumpy foam. I'm going to move on to my baby eucalyptus now, which has a lot of similarities to this in building it. But for that, we're going to be using a pre-colored sheet of wafer paper. These, just like with the antique floral text, this was created with my edible ink printer just as solid color sheets. We're going to be doing a duotone. We're going to have the darker color on the bottom and the lighter color on the top. I've already cut a couple strips and we're going to punch them out with yet another new craft punch. This one is a multi-petal punch. I think this one's another one of the Fiskars. And it has a really nice grip handle. Again, we can double these up if you want to, but since we're using two different colors, it might be easier to avoid the whole separating them out by just keeping your colors separate in the first place. Now when you go in here, we don't need that little circle punch, so I just try to keep it lined up with my top two petals. Not looking to get that circle in there. This strip is about 1.25 inches. And the only reason I know to use 1.25 inches is because I've done this a few times and I've kind of seen that 1 inch is too little to work with. It's kind of trial and error. I start just a little bit bigger, but if I notice I can save myself some paper, I move down for the next set of strips. Just cut one at the start. Okay. Pull apart our little stragglers so they don't get in our way. We're going to start making our eucalyptus by kind of lining these up and sandwiching them together. Separate your large petals from your small in each color so that you don't get mixed up. They're really very similar in size. And now I said the dark color is going to go on the bottom, so we're going to start with that one against our finger. And if I told you light on the water before, I really mean light on the water now. Otherwise, you'll get tiny little puckers in the center. So we're going to line these up. Just give them a press. Now we have a light top side, darker bottom side. I'm going to do the same thing with our large ones. This is another one of those kind of tedious tasks. You can sit down in front of the TV late at night with a glass of wine, or you can enlist your children to help. This is really a very simple technique. You're going to make a whole bunch of these in both sizes. I would use probably 2 full strips of each color for what will turn into 1 branch of the eucalyptus. I'm going to show you how to bring these together now, just before we assemble them on our cloth-covered brown branch. I have some that we've already cut out. To bring these together, they're going to kind of look like a set of Halloween eyes almost. We're going to bring them together just at their points. Don't use a lot of water. Those points are very, very narrow, and they're going to want to melt very quickly. One little tip that I don't know if I've shared with you yet is if you think you might have just put a little too much water on there, but you're doing it to sandwich more wafer onto it, get that other piece of wafer on there real quick, and it'll share the water with the other piece, and you won't have as much damage, and you may be able to avoid any kind of melting that would otherwise happen. Told you wafer was versatile and very forgiving. Whoop, upside down. We're going to do the same thing with the small ones. We're going to transition on the branch from the top being the small ones, coming down to the large ones. And very much like our freesia, the top is going to be slightly more concentrated in quantity than the bottom will. They're going to space out a little bit more towards the bottom. See, this is quick work, but it's tedious work. You need a lot. So I'm going to make just a couple more of these dual leaves, and then I'm going to show you how to assemble it on our wire. So the little leaves, the tids and bits for our eucalyptus are all ready to go. They've all been combined like this. We're going to start with our small ones, actually. Those are going to go towards the top. You're going to place your top one top down. The rest are going to get threaded up from the bottom. So you're going to start using a very fine paintbrush and a little bit more water than what you've been comfortable with thus far. Tiny, tiny little bit right where those 2 pieces of drop-shaped wafer come together. Insert your cloth-covered floral tape. Stop pretty close to the top. Don't thread it down too much. And give it just a little bit of a curve upward. Now that tiny, tiny bit of water is going to act to make that jelly but it's also going to kind of glue it to your cloth. If this were tape covered, it wouldn't work as well. You wouldn't get as much of that grip. Tape it kind of wants to slide off of, and for some applications that's completely beneficial. Not for this one. Again, a little bit of wire, or a little bit of water. Now when you slide these up from the bottom, you're going to be moving along a much longer piece of wire. You have to be more careful. If you simply support the wafer with your fingers and gently move the wire down, that's going to be better than trying to push the wafer up. You're not going to move it around as much, and it's not going to tear at that really, really delicate point. Now when I thread these on, this is a really long wire, when I thread these on, I do try to have these kind of offset just a little. I don't like them to all sit in a line and straight. I like them to be a little bit more unrefined. See this top one? This is already stuck. We just did this, what, 30 seconds ago? This is already good to go. You do need to be gentle though now when you're moving this, because this really is a very delicate point. If you do hit it at this point, you're likely, for the ones you just put on, to tear them back off. My eucalyptus is waving at you. It's a friendly plant. Now I pinched that one a little bit much, and that's okay, because sometimes these do have a little bit more of a closed shape to them. Just be careful if you're going to go to open this back up, just be a little careful, because that might have actually turned into a weak point, and it might actually have a little tear in there. So it might just split in half and fall off, and it's not a big deal. You've got plenty. But I want that to come down just a little bit. But you know what? It is delicate. I'm not going to be able to pull it down. That's fine. It's not a big deal. Now I know this feels kind of tedious and feels like it's taking a long time. You cannot make eucalyptus out of gum paste. And eucalyptus is super popular right now as a bouquet filler for weddings. So to be able to add this to your floral repertoire for your cakes, it's going to set you apart a little bit. This is really unique. You can vary your coloring of your eucalyptus. Some eucalyptus is a little less frosty than this. It's a little bit deeper. Some's even more frosty and it feels more white and gray. I like this kind of faded mint type color. This is the eucalyptus that I remember in our home growing up. My mom had vases of dried flowers, so this is it's a little nostalgic for me. Now, as you're working, you're going to pick up a lot of the food coloring that created the color on your paper. You're going to get a lot of that on your paintbrush, and it's going to continue to build up. So you want to wipe your paintbrush off every so often to just clear it of all that extra color. Eventually, that's going to turn into looking like little drops of excess color on your wafer. Now down towards the bottom here, because I keep pushing this over and this is cloth covered, and when I say cloth covered, it's more like a spiral thread. It's starting to unravel a little bit. So after this one, I'm just going to grab my wire cutters and snip off probably just maybe 1/3 of an inch at the bottom and keep going. These are long enough stems. This is an 18-inch floral wire, so you have plenty of room to move. So long as you just keep it trimmed, it's never going to unravel too much for you. I'm just going to grab my wire cutters and take off only about 1/3 of an inch. I don't really need that much. I just want to make sure there's no more loose wire there. If I kept threading these on with that tiny little bit right there sticking out, it's creating a much bigger pocket and a much bigger hole. than what I need for my eucalyptus. And if it's big, it's not going to sit right against your thread. It's not going to glue to it. It's going to fall off, and chances are this is just going to tear and break. So I'm going to keep working up the stem here. I'm only going to go about halfway with my small petals, leaves. And then I'm going to finish up the bottom portion with my larger leaves. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. We are just about at the bottom of our eucalyptus. You do need to give yourself a little extra room before you're going to insert it into your styrofoam separator. I've showed you a lot of really fabulous flowers and leaves and ways to use wafer paper. I would love to see what you guys have done with it, so be sure to post your pictures of your creations to our forum. And in our next lesson, we're going to do some coloring after creation using a pre-val sprayer, which is a really great and economical alternative to an airbrush. An airbrush is a really big expense. And we'll be doing some dry dusting. I'll meet you there.